medium rare, with mashed potatoes. The order was simple, but the man who spoke it was anything but ordinary. His name was Daniel Grant, a self-made millionaire who owned more businesses than most people could count on both hands. Yet tonight, no one in this small-town diner had the slightest clue who he really was. Daniel sat in the far corner booth, dressed in plain jeans, a faded jacket, and worn-out sneakers. He looked like any other traveler stopping by for a meal after a long drive. That was exactly what he wanted. Money and success had given him everything: cars, mansions, private jets. But it had also taken away something important: the ability to know how people treated him when they thought he was just a regular guy. So, he started doing something unusual. Every few weeks, Daniel would disguise himself as an ordinary customer and eat at local restaurants or stay in small motels. It wasn't about testing the food or comfort. It was about seeing how people treated the powerless. Tonight's stop was Louie's Diner, a place with neon lights buzzing above the entrance, cracked leather seats, and a smell of bacon grease that clung to the air. To anyone else, it was just another roadside diner. But for Daniel, it was a chance to look beyond his fortune. The waitress assigned to him walked up with a notepad in her hand. Her name tag read Maya. She looked young, maybe early 20s, but her face carried exhaustion far beyond her years. Her hair was tied back in a messy bun, and strands slipped loose as she tucked them behind her ear. Still, she smiled at him, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Steak, medium rare." "I'll put it in," she said politely, writing down his order. Daniel noticed her hands trembling slightly as she held the pen. He also caught the faintest limp in her walk when she turned toward the kitchen. It was the kind of detail most people would miss, but Daniel's eyes had been trained by years of watching employees, partners, and strangers. He could read body language better than most. Something about her was off. As he leaned back against the booth, Daniel let his gaze wander. Families laughed at tables. A trucker at the counter told a joke that made the cook chuckle from the kitchen. The jukebox in the corner hummed softly with an old country tune. On the surface, everything looked ordinary. But Maya's nervous glances at the clock on the wall, her forced smile, and the quiet sadness in her eyes told a different story. Daniel had no idea yet just how serious her situation was. But fate had a strange way of putting him in the right place at the right time. And within the hour, the waitress in the faded apron would slip him a note that would shake him to his core. The diner carried on like any other night. Forks scraped against plates, coffee cups clinked, and the faint hum of conversation filled the air. For most customers, it was just another stop for late-night food. But for Daniel, every small detail stood out. He noticed how Maya, the waitress, forced a smile at customers but kept checking over her shoulder toward the kitchen door. Every time the large man in the greasy apron barked an order from inside, she flinched slightly. She moved quickly, almost nervously, as though every step mattered. Daniel sipped his water, pretending not to notice. His years as a businessman had taught him to keep calm on the surface while watching carefully underneath. Something was definitely wrong. When Maya returned to his booth, she carried a small basket of warm bread. She placed it carefully on the table, her hands steadying themselves on the tray. But then, in one quick, almost invisible motion, she did something unusual. She slid a folded piece of paper under the edge of his plate. Daniel's brow furrowed. His instincts sharpened. He glanced up at her, but she avoided his eyes. Instead, she said in a voice just loud enough for him to hear, "Your steak will be out in about 10 minutes, before rushing off to refill another customer's coffee." Now curious, Daniel casually reached under his plate and pulled out the paper. He unfolded it under the table, making sure no one else could see. The handwriting was messy, hurried, and shaky. The note read only 2 short sentences. "Please help me. Don't tell anyone." Daniel's heart tightened. This wasn't some prank. This wasn't just a random scribble. It was a plea for help. He leaned back in the booth, scanning the room without making it obvious. Nobody seemed to notice what had just happened. The families kept eating, the truckers kept laughing, and the couple in the corner kept chatting as if nothing in the world was wrong. But Maya wasn't laughing. Her hands shook as she poured coffee at the counter. Her face turned pale every time she passed near the kitchen. And Daniel noticed something else. The man in the greasy apron, the cook, kept glaring at her through the swinging door window. The pieces were starting to come together. The note, the trembling hands, the limp in her walk. the constant fear in her eyes. Maya wasn't just tired. She wasn't just stressed. She was afraid. Daniel folded the note back up, sliding it into his pocket. His mind raced with questions. Afraid of what? Afraid of who? And most importantly, how could he help without putting her in more danger? When Maya came back with his steak plate a few minutes later, Daniel caught her eye for the briefest second. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His calm, steady look told her one thing clearly. I read it, and I won't ignore it. At that moment, Daniel Grant, the undercover millionaire who came to this diner just to eat like an ordinary man, realized he had stumbled into something much bigger, and the truth waiting behind the kitchen door would be darker than he imagined. Daniel wasn't the type of man who could ignore a cry for help. For years, he had made decisions that affected thousands of employees, investors, and families. And one lesson he learned early was simple. When someone is desperate enough to ask for help, you listen. He watched Maya closely as she worked her section of the diner. Every movement of hers was a signal, her shoulders stiff when the kitchen door creaked open, her quick smile fading whenever the man in the greasy apron came into view. Daniel studied him carefully. The man was large, broad-shouldered, with tattoos climbing up both arms and a permanent scowl etched across his face. From the way he barked at the younger waitresses, Daniel could tell he was used to being in control. And Maya, she looked like she had no choice but to obey. When she came back to top off his glass of water, Daniel lowered his voice and spoke just loud enough for her to hear. I read your note, he said firmly but calmly. What's going on? Her eyes widened instantly. Fear flickered across her face, and her hand trembled as she held the pitcher. Please, she whispered so quietly he could barely hear. Don't say anything. If he hears. She shook her head quickly and rushed off before Daniel could ask another question. That confirmed it. Whatever she was going through, it was connected to the man in the kitchen. Daniel's steak sat half-eaten on his plate, but he could no longer focus on food. Instead, he slid out of the booth, straightened his jacket, and walked casually toward the restroom sign near the back. But instead of going inside, he paused beside the swinging kitchen door, listening. Voices. One of them was Maya's. Her tone was nervous, shaky. I'll work the double shift, okay? Just please don't. The man's voice cut her off, rough and full of menace. Don't tell me what to do. You owe me, Maya. Don't forget who pays the bills around here. Daniel's chest tightened. There was a sharp thud, like someone hitting the wall. Then silence. He pushed the door open just an inch, peeking inside. What he saw made his blood run cold. The man had Maya cornered against the wall, one meaty hand clamped around her wrist. Her face was twisted in pain, but she wasn't screaming. No, she was silent, as though she'd learned that crying out only made things worse. The cook leaned in close, his voice a low growl. You step out of line again, and your mother's the one who'll pay for it. You understand me? Maya nodded quickly, eyes brimming with tears. Daniel stepped back, heart pounding, his jaw tightening. He had seen enough. This wasn't just a bad boss. This was abuse, control, fear. And in that moment, Daniel knew he couldn't walk away. He had come here to eat dinner like a regular man. But fate had other plans. Maya needed help, real help, and Daniel Grant was about to give it to her. Daniel returned to his booth, his mind racing. He had spent years negotiating billion-dollar deals, facing ruthless competitors, and making decisions under pressure. But nothing compared to the anger boiling inside him after what he had just witnessed in the kitchen. Maya wasn't just a tired waitress trying to make ends meet. She was trapped, bullied, and threatened. And the man hurting her, the so-called cook, believed nobody would stop him. Daniel leaned back, pulled out his phone, and typed a short message. The screen lit up. Need you at Louis' diner. Now. He pressed send. Minutes later, Maya walked past his booth, her face pale, her wrist red where the man had grabbed her. Daniel's jaw tightened at the sight, but he forced his expression to remain calm. He raised his hand slightly. Maya, he said softly, sit with me, just for a moment. She hesitated. Her eyes darted to the kitchen door, then back to him. I can't. Hill. Yes, you can, Daniel interrupted gently. His voice carried a calm authority, the kind that made people believe him instantly. Trust me. For the first time that night, Maya slid into the booth across from him. Her hands twisted the edge of her apron nervously. Tears brimmed in her eyes as though she had been holding them back for weeks. In a rush, she confessed. He's my stepbrother. This diner, it's technically his. He forces me to work here. He takes all my tips, yells at me, and if I try to leave, he threatens my mom. She's sick, and I can't risk anything happening to her. I didn't know who else to ask. That's why I gave you the note." Daniel's expression hardened. The pieces finally clicked together. This wasn't just workplace harassment. It was control, manipulation, and cruelty disguised behind the walls of a diner. "You did the right thing," Daniel said firmly. "And I promise you, this ends tonight." Before Maya could respond, the bell above the diner door jingled. Two tall men in dark suits walked in, scanning the room. They moved with precision, their eyes immediately finding Daniel in the corner booth. Customers whispered, glancing nervously at the newcomers. These weren't ordinary men. They were Daniel's private security, who had been waiting nearby just in case. The kitchen door slammed open. The cook stormed out, wiping his greasy hands on a towel, anger blazing in his eyes. "What's going on here? You slacking off, Maya?" His voice boomed across the diner. Daniel stood slowly, straightening his jacket. His calm voice cut through the tense air. "What's going on," he said evenly, "is over. Maya isn't your prisoner anymore." The cook sneered. "And who the hell are you supposed to be? Some drifter with money for a steak?" Daniel reached into his jacket, pulled out his ID wallet, and placed it flat on the table. His voice carried like a gavel in a courtroom. "My name is Daniel Grant. I don't just eat here. I own half the properties in this county. And as of tonight, I own this diner too." The entire room went silent. Maya gasped. The customers froze. And the cook's face went pale. The diner was frozen in silence. Every customer, every waitress, even the cook himself stood stunned after Daniel revealed who he really was. The air buzzed with disbelief. This ordinary man in jeans and a faded jacket was actually a millionaire, and now, the owner of the very diner they were standing in. The cook's face twisted with anger. "You can't just walk in here and take over. This is my place," he roared, stepping forward. Daniel didn't flinch. His security detail moved immediately, stepping between him and the cook. The customers gasped as the towering men in suits stood like immovable walls, blocking the cook's path. "Correction," Daniel said coolly, sliding a folded set of papers onto the counter. "I finalized the purchase an hour ago. The deed is already in my name. You're finished here." The cook's defiance faltered. He stammered, looking around the room for support, but the customers avoided his eyes. They had all seen the way he treated Maya for months. Nobody stepped in before because they were afraid, but now his power was gone. "Escort him out," Daniel ordered. The security guards seized the cook by his arms. He kicked and cursed, but there was no fight left in him. As they dragged him out the diner doors, the room erupted, not in fear, but in applause. Maya sat frozen in the booth, hands trembling over her mouth. She looked at Daniel as if he were someone out of a dream. You really bought the diner?" "For me." Daniel's expression softened. "Not just for you. For every person he's hurt. But mostly," he paused, meeting her tearful gaze, "because no one should live in fear at their job. No one should feel trapped." Maya's lips trembled. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll run it," Daniel said simply. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents giving her full management of the diner. "I'll help with the overhead costs. You'll keep the profits. This is your chance to build something real. For yourself, for your mother. Not as a handout, Maya, but as an opportunity. You've already proven you're stronger than most people I know." Tears spilled down her cheeks. For the first time in years, her shoulders relaxed. The chains of fear that bound her to this place were gone. The customers stood and clapped again, some even wiping away their own tears. One woman whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "She deserves this." Maya smiled through her tears, whispering, "You changed my life." Daniel shook his head slowly. "No, Maya. You reminded me why I built my fortune in the first place. Money means nothing if you don't use it to help people. Tonight, you reminded me of that." He stood, leaving a generous tip on the table, though Maya knew she would never need tips again. As Daniel walked out into the cool night air, he felt lighter, as though he had gained more than he had given. Behind him, the neon sign of Louie's Diner flickered, but for the first time, the place felt alive. Because tonight, it belonged to Maya.